Dear friends, a lifetime of love. That is the most precious gift that each of us can give to life. In the hustle and bustle of life, there are times when we forget that the most beautiful thing is not the great things we achieve, but the small loves we share every day. Who would have thought that behind the closed doors of a modest countryside home, where the wind rustled through golden rice fields and birds chirped like nothing had ever gone wrong, there brewed a secret so devastating it would tear apart an entire family? Who would have imagined that a daughter-in-law, loved by her neighbors, respected by her elders, would one day carry a child, not of her husband, but of his father? Her name was Mai, 28 years old, soft-spoken, and beautiful in a quiet, melancholic way. She grew up in a humble fishing village where life was simple, even if not always kind. When she married Hui, a local mechanic 6 years her senior, everyone thought she was the luckiest girl in town. Hui was dependable, handsome, and had just finished building a new house on the edge of the village, with help from his father, Mr. Kang, a stoic, broad-shouldered man in his 50s who had been widowed for over a decade. No one spoke much about Hui's mother. She had passed away mysteriously one rainy night, found face down in the pond behind the house. Drowned, they said, but some whispered of shadows seen that night, of arguments heard through thin wooden walls. Mai and Hui's wedding was a small, joyful affair. Lanterns glowed in the dusk, drums echoed down the narrow dirt road, and Mr. Kang stood at the front, beaming with pride. He hugged his new daughter-in-law a little too long, a little too tightly, but no one noticed. Or if they did, they brushed it off as fatherly affection. After all, hadn't he raised Hui alone? Hadn't he sacrificed everything for this family? The first year was blissful. Mai and Hui worked side by side, him at the garage, her running a small roadside tea stall. But over time, things changed. Hui began coming home later and later, sometimes drunk, sometimes smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. He grew distant, short-tempered. Their intimacy faded, replaced by awkward silence and forced smiles. Then, one night, everything changed. It was raining again. Kind of rain that made the whole village retreat indoors and latch their doors tight. Hui had gone on a week-long job in the city. Alone in the house, Mai felt a growing unease. Not fear exactly, but a strange heaviness in her chest. She stayed up late, pacing between rooms, trying to distract herself with chores. That's when she heard it, a knock at the door. She opened it to find Mr. Kang, soaked, shivering, his eyes red, not just from the rain. He had come to check on her, he said, worried she was alone. Mai let him in, offered him tea, laid out a towel. But something felt off. His eyes lingered, his words slurred ever so slightly. He looked at her in a way a father-in-law should never look at his daughter-in-law. She tried to brush it off. Perhaps he was just tired. But as the hours ticked by, the air between them grew thick with unspoken tension. Then it happened, quick, brutal, confusing. A hand on her waist, a breath on her neck. Her body froze. Her mind screamed. She pushed him away, told him to leave. But he didn't. What happened that night is something Mai would never be able to fully explain. Not to herself. Not to anyone. There were no bruises. No witnesses. Only silence and the sound of her own guilt gnawing at her bones. And a few weeks later, morning sickness. She thought about running away. About confronting him. About telling Hui. But how could she? Who would believe her? In this village, a woman accusing her father-in-law of such horror would be crucified by gossip, torn apart by shame. The months passed in a blur. Hui returned but remained distant, lost in his own world. Mr. Kang acted as if nothing happened. He smiled. He joked. He brought her mangoes from the market. When she finally confirmed her pregnancy, Hui seemed indifferent. He mumbled something about it being good news. But Mai noticed how Mr. Kang's hands trembled when he heard. How he avoided her eyes. How he lingered in the hallway outside her room late at night. The child grew in her womb, like a ticking time bomb. And then came the letter. An anonymous envelope slid under the door one morning, with only 3 words scrawled across cheap lined paper. It's his child. Mai's world spun. Who knew? Who could have written it? She tore the paper apart, flushed it down the toilet, and tried to pretend it didn't exist. But that night, she found another letter, this one inside her apron pocket, and another in the tea cabinet. The whispers had begun. Eyes in the village followed her. Smiles disappeared. Conversations ended when she entered the room. Huey grew colder, accusing. He began asking questions. Where had she been? Why was his father so generous to her? Why did the baby have his father's eyes? Then one day, the confrontation. Huey returned from work early, fury blazing in his eyes. He threw the letters on the table, demanded the truth, screamed, cursed. I stood silent, trembling, clutching her belly, as if the baby inside could shield her from the storm. Mr. Kang walked in, saw the scene, and in a moment of panic, confessed. I made a mistake, he whispered. I was drunk. I thought she wanted. A crack. A roar. Huey lunged. A chair toppled. Blood on the floor. The neighbors came running. And just like that, their lives imploded. The village never forgot. The story spread like wildfire, mutating into crueler versions with each retelling. Some said I seduced him. Others claimed it was revenge for Huey's neglect. But no one asked what she felt. No one cared that she cried herself to sleep every night, that she gave birth alone in a hospital 3 towns away, far from the accusing eyes and poisoned words. Her child, a boy, never met his father. Not Huey. Not Kang. He only knew the sound of his mother's voice and the silence she carried like a shroud. But this was only the beginning, because one day, years later, the boy found an old photograph hidden in a cracked box beneath his mother's bed, and the face he saw there would change everything again. The photo was yellowed with age, folded neatly like a painful memory no one dared confront. A man stood beside a young woman, their smiles frozen in time, but their eyes filled with something else, something darker. The woman, unmistakably Mai, though younger and softer. The man, not Huey, and not Mr. Kang either. At least, not as the boy remembered him. He stared at it for hours, his tiny fingers tracing the lines of his mother's face. Then he took it to her. Who is this? He asked. Mai froze. Her breath hitched. In a flash, her face went pale, as if death had walked through the door and whispered a forgotten name. It's no one, she said. But the lie didn't hold. The boy, now 9, had grown up with questions he'd never asked. Why his classmates had fathers, and he didn't? Why his mother always changed the subject when he asked about their past? Why they had moved 3 times in 5 years? The photograph became his obsession. He began asking neighbors, listening to their whispers. And what he heard shattered him. Didn't you know? An old vendor said one day, your grandpa, he's your real dad. The boy didn't understand. He went home that night and sat at the dinner table in silence. Mai looked at him, her eyes tired. She could feel the storm before it hit. Tea started with a lie, not the kind of lie people tell to protect someone, but the kind that brews in the dark, fed by silence, and explodes in ways no one sees coming. Who would have thought a young woman, barely 26, radiant with hope, married into a respected family, only to become the center of a storm so perverse, so soul-twisting, that even the walls of their grand estate seemed to whisper in shame. Her name was Liana. Soft-spoken, polite, the kind of daughter-in-law every mother dreams of. She had married Daniel just 2 years ago, a love story that blossomed from university lecture halls into candlelit promises and wedding vows beneath an arch of white roses. Daniel, tall and ambitious, was everything a woman like Liana could want. And his family? Wealthy, influential, and seemingly tight-knit. But what's that saying? Not all that glitters is gold. The house they moved into wasn't just large. It was a maze of generational secrets. Built by Daniel's grandfather, it housed more than portraits and antiques. It held eyes. Eyes that watched, listened, judged. And then there was Richard, Daniel's father. A man of stature, a former colonel with silver hair, stern eyes, and a presence that silenced rooms. He was respected, feared even. Liana had always felt uneasy around him, though she chalked it up to the usual nerves that came with being part of a new family. But the whispers began soon after their wedding. Liana would hear them from the maids, hushed voices behind closed doors, half-sentences cut short when she entered the room. At first, she ignored them, but the unease grew. The first real crack appeared the night of Daniel's business trip to Singapore. It was supposed to be a 4-day journey. Liana stayed behind, her schedule packed with volunteer work and household duties. On the second night, a storm rolled in, the kind that shakes windows and pulls shadows across walls. The electricity flickered, and then footsteps. She thought it was a maid. But when she turned from the balcony, Richard stood in the doorway, wet from the rain, his military coat draped over one arm. He said he'd gone for a walk to clear his head. He asked if she was all right. His voice was calm, calculated. He sat beside her and began to talk about life, regret, choices. His tone softened. The father-in-law she once feared seemed human, vulnerable. It was only later she would realize how predators disarm their prey, with sympathy, not claws. Weeks passed, then months. The dynamic between them shifted subtly. He'd linger longer at breakfast, comment on her perfume, offer to help her with things that didn't need helping. Daniel noticed none of it, consumed by work and political aspirations. Liana told herself it was harmless, that Richard was just lonely. Until that night. It was a family gathering. The house brimmed with guests. Laughter, clinking glasses, the scent of roasted duck. Daniel had too much to drink and went upstairs early. Liana remained downstairs, tidying up. Richard approached her in the hallway. He complimented her dress, touched her shoulder, and then, without warning, he kissed her. The world didn't stop. No thunder crashed, just a frozen silence. Liana pulled away, trembling. She stammered something, fled to her room, and locked the door. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind spun. Was it a mistake? Was he drunk? Should she tell Daniel? But she said nothing. That silence would cost her everything. The incident was never spoken of. Richard avoided her gaze for weeks. Liana resumed her routine, burying her discomfort beneath forced smiles. But something inside her shifted, a sliver of fear, always present. Then came the sickness. Nausea in the mornings. Fatigue. Missed cycles. A test confirmed it. She was pregnant. She told Daniel, and he was ecstatic. He lifted her off the ground, spun her around, told his entire office the next day. The family celebrated. Even Richard. But something gnawed at her. She began to count the days. The timelines. The trip to Singapore. The storm. Doubt became a dagger. She confided in her best friend, May, a doctor. May tried to reassure her, but she saw the same doubt flicker in her friend's eyes. There's only one way to be sure, she said. A paternity test. Secret. Discreet. It took weeks. The results came in a plain envelope. Liana sat in the garden, heart pounding as she opened it. One line changed everything. Probability of paternity. 99.99%. Richard L. The paper fell from her hands. Her stomach turned. The walls of the estate seemed to close in. Her breath caught in her throat. She was carrying her father-in-law's child. The horror didn't end there. It was just the beginning. She didn't tell Daniel. Not yet. Not because she wanted to lie, but because she didn't know how to destroy him. How to shatter a man who had never hurt her, who loved her deeply, unconditionally. But secrets rot. And soon, they began to show. Richard became possessive. Quietly so. He'd offer to accompany her to doctor visits, make veiled comments about the life they created. At first, she avoided him. Then, she confronted him, demanded answers. Why? Why did you do it? Why did you destroy me? He looked at her, ice cold. Because you're mine. You were always mine. His obsession had roots, deeper than she could comprehend. He spoke of his failing marriage, his loneliness, how she reminded him of a woman he loved long ago. Delusions cloaked as affection, madness disguised as love. Liana realized she wasn't just carrying a child. She was carrying a curse. But it wouldn't be long before Daniel found out. Not from her. He overheard a conversation between May and Liana. Fragments of truth spilled through a cracked door. The next morning, he was gone. His phone rang endlessly. No answer. Liana searched the house. Panic consumed her. She found his car parked by the old riverbed, the engine still warm. Inside, his wedding ring. And a letter. I thought you were my future. But you were the ending I never saw coming. Liana collapsed, screamed into the wind, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of rushing water. She had lost everything, but the storm wasn't over, because now the whole family knew.